Thank you, Rich. Good morning. I hope everyone noticed I came armed with regs and the law, so we could just read through it or do something a little. So are you sufficiently terrified? Okay, good. Then we'll start. All right, so why am I here today? I'm here today because my colleague and friend, Rick Pazder, not Rich Schulsky, not a colleague or a friend, but asked for a broader, right, exactly, a broader perspective on data quality in general. And I think that raises the question, when we think about regulations and our regulatory obligations, are all sponsors alike? So are cooperative groups different? And we can think about that. And we can also think about whether cancer is different and whether, in fact, serious diseases are different. And this is where I turn to one of my favorite parts of the regs, which, because the answer to that, are serious diseases such as cancer different? The answer is both yes and no. So in 88, we said in certain ways, yes, the FDA has determined that it is appropriate, we all know this is Subpart E, to exercise the broadest flexibility in applying the statutory standards while preserving appropriate guarantees for safety and effectiveness. So it is different in terms of the types of trials, in terms of how much of a rush we're in terms of whether there's available therapy. But it's not different in terms of human subject protection. And many different bodies, including the U.S. Supreme Court, have determined that even patients with serious illnesses are entitled to protection. And in our mind, the best protection is good data quality. And Rich, you talked a lot about how less can be more or more can be less. And I think I'm going to do a little whirlwind review of what our latest thinking on data quality and the fact that in cancer, there's no difference. We need high quality data. We may need an accelerated approval, if you will, on a biomarker. We may need on fewer patients, but we need high quality data or we can't make a decision that's going to impact patients. So first we go, this is, I promise, the last thing I'll read you, but again, we're thinking about, because this has stood the test of time, not only 50 years, but comes under attack every PDUFA cycle and survives. This is the efficacy standard. And it talks about substantial evidence. So there are three prongs in my mind. All tests reasonably applicable, such that experts can reasonably conclude. And then it talks about what the effect that is purported to have in labeling. So three standards. What kind of trials? What do we make of that information? Can we interpret the information? And then finally, how will it inform clinical practice? How will we communicate that? Because at the end of the day, if the data are not useful to healthcare providers and to their patients to make a difference in lives, then we really should not have been doing that trial. And if anyone is interested in the Kefauver-Harris amendments, there was a nice piece in the New England Journal not so long ago. Interestingly enough, they were after a comparative efficacy standard in the beginning, and they didn't get it. But nonetheless, it stood the test of time. So where do we talk about, given that we have this pillar of three things, the right tests, experts who can interpret it, and then appropriately communicating it, are there other constraints, or where do we put some meat on the bones or flesh that out? There are a lot of constraints. There's not a lot of if you will, required for certain types of approaches. As I think you all know, adequate and well-controlled studies are defined in the FDA regs. There are 6 different types, including historical controls. So as I will point out in a few moments, what's well known to this group, in cancer, one sees more single-arm trials. One sees that also less blinding in some areas, less randomization. All of that is perfectly appropriate as long, again, as the quality of the data collected is high. And when I say that, I generally mean fit for use. In terms of, and this is just a plug again I will make towards the end, how we all spend our resources. So our resources are the dollars available. Our resources are also patients available. If we're randomizing patients or enrolling patients in trials that really can generate useful information, or if we're not, we don't necessarily have authority to stop a trial that will not generate useful data. We have it in late stages, stage end of phase 2, phase 3, we can put a trial on hold if it's not designed to meet its stated goal. But other than that, we have limited authority. I think we all know that a lot of trials are conducted in this country and in the world that use resources that expose people to test articles that don't produce information, and that raises, I think, a large ethical problem. And then, of course, in the IND safety reporting, and Rich got us started on that. Last year, we changed our regulations for expedited reporting, serious AEs, the 7 to 15-day reports. Why did we do that? Well, we did that for the reasons that Rich alluded to. The whole system was being drowned in paper. And when we looked, the paper, which is expensive, time-consuming, and a great disincentive to participate in clinical trials, I think both from the investigator and from the patient point of view, was not providing useful information. We were getting many expedited reports, and they go, remember, it starts a cascade, and it just blossoms out. We would get on study endpoints. We would get them on known consequences of the disease, for example. So information that couldn't possibly be useful. So we revised the regulations to ensure that the expedited reports are things we need to know and need to know quickly, and the investigators need to know and need to know quickly. Something extremely unusual, a couple of cases. My favorite example of that would be the quinolones and tendon rupture. The first case, that was not informative, but by the second or third case, that was beginning to tell us something. Or an aggregate report, and I'll talk about that in a moment. I think that the guidance that Rich alluded to fleshes out in more detail the kinds of things we expect to see and when we expect to see it. But the general idea is that we want to see the important information quickly. The rest we will see in aggregate in the annual report, and we do not want investigators burdened with information that at best will just annoy them and at worst will distract them. Rich has spent time on the first guidance, the determining extent of safety data collection. I hope that the ASCO comments were sent to the docket because we do take that very seriously. And I'm seeing nods, good. The next, again, a place to look for our thought about data quality and when less is more and when more is less is oversight of clinical investigations. And I know at least one person in the audience has actually read this because I was asked about it at the break. And here's where the cooperative groups have shined in terms of your approach to clinical monitoring. You don't send a person to every site every 2 weeks, which we think is probably not the best approach, which if we want to talk about antiquated guidance, we did have 12-year-old guidance we finally pulled down that more or less recommended that. And here we talk about the fact that there are a variety of approaches and foreshadowing what I know Sandra may say later because I've seen her slides, talking about the importance of talking to us ahead of time, talking to us early, making sure that you're collecting what's important, that you're going to audit against what's important, and we all agree about that. So that actually was a huge paradigm change between the change in the safety reporting regulations and this. Some companies embraced them. I mean, it's still new, and some companies really shuddered and felt very frightened by it. So that we found interesting because we think the companies that have actually started to implement these changes are finding it really streamlines their processes, lowers their expense, but most importantly, improves the quality of the data. So we've talked about that. What we are starting to roll out now is what we hinted at in the clinical monitoring guidance, which is who should be continuously watching the safety profile as it evolves. And we believe that, and the regulations require that rests with the sponsor. Because someone or a group sitting there should be seeing everything that comes along and at some point either saying we're worried or continuing to watch it and deciding that there isn't a problem. So we recommend, and stay tuned, there'll be more guidance, that such a systematic approach should be in place. We know that in the case of many companies it already is. Whether that's firewalled off from the rest of the trial is something that everyone has to think about, and whether, or it could be outside the company, but in general we think these are carried out within companies. So that's that's not DMC, it's something else, but it's someone who's worried about the emerging safety profile on a continuous basis. What these aggregate reports may look like, and again, this is something that groups such as ASCO may want to comment on as we continue this conversation. But again, we think when enough is known that an investigator is made aware of the information, it should be in a digestible form, not a series of line listings. And we talk a little bit in the guidance and in our thinking about what the aggregate report should look like. And as always, and Rich, you touched on this, and I think this is part of your answer to our guidance is perfectly harmonized, which we try hard, but they never are. And the 2001 guidance says this very clearly. Before the plan is put into place, come talk to us, or in this case, come talk to Rick and his folks. Make sure that everyone is happy. Depending on the agent, maybe grade 2 hematologic AEs are important, and maybe they're not. It would really depend on the agent and the population. And if, in fact, you find that, remember that 15-day reports have to be by definition unexpected, and unexpected has this not so intuitive definition of being the investigator brochure. It may be that there are a group of AEs that can be carved out in addition to the ones that would already not be reported in an expedited manner, and that's a conversation we'd like to have with you. So just a little plug for two things, for CITI and for intelligent, informative clinical trials. So CITI Clinical Trials Transformation Initiative, Nancy Roche is on our executive committee, is a public-private partnership co-founded by FDA and Duke with the goal of modernizing the clinical trial enterprise, which we all know is kind of stodgy. Hans, which is also on our executive committee. And one project we did in the last, I guess, year and a half was look in clinicaltrials.gov and see if we could get a snapshot of what was there. And what was discovered is something that any FDA reviewer can tell you. The vast majority of the trials done in this country are small and uninformative. And that's a very sad fact. But now we have data and numbers to back it up, not just our gut feeling. There are other pieces of information that are interesting in this, such as oncology trials are more often not randomized and not blinded, but there are reasons behind that. But the important thing is that we may not be spending, or we're probably not, or we're almost definitely not spending our resources as wisely as we should. And we as a nation have to, and internationally as well, have to think about how we can change that trend. Another city project, and again, this is just the kinds of things we try to think about, and it's a multi-stakeholder group, so we actually have the ability to hear from everybody and move forward, is why are more large, what a lot of people call large simple trials, but I think one could have a small simple trial. Why are not more streamlined trials not done? Why is there this compulsion to check every box, collect every piece of data? It can't be that everyone's just so very terrified that when they come to us that we'll say, why didn't you collect that? That's an illogical response, because we keep trying to say in as many ways as we can. I've just gone through a number of different guidances and regs that say, no, that's not what we think. So please come talk to us. Please think about getting involved in some of the other efforts that think about how to make sure we're making every dollar and, more importantly, every patient count. So is cancer different? Yes. Yes, in terms of time trials, in terms of the patients, but no, not in terms of the data quality. We need high quality data. The worst thing to do is expose a person to a test agent and not have that count. The quantity is less important unless obviously it's drowning out the useful information and creating too much noise. Prescriptive trial design is not how we function. What we care about in the end, and this came up a little bit interestingly in the discussion of the diagnostics, how generalizable is it? Obviously, a diagnostic that starts with the product at the very early phases is not going to be the diagnostic that we end up with. Yet, at the end of the day, when we want to approve an agent, we have to be confident that the diagnostic in use is going to properly inform clinical use of that product. In our minds, the best way to do that is an approved test and an approved drug at the same time. But we can't have a whole host of homebrews that people are cooking up in their wherever, garages, and really not knowing. And then we get into reimbursement issues. So we have to know that it's generalizable. And at the end of the day, it's our obligation to communicate it through labeling. And then just on a personal note, so I say this as a regulator, but I also say this, frankly, as a cancer survivor. We have a societal obligation to ensure that every trial counts. And until we get rid of all those, what I used to call in my early days at FDA, safe but stupid, although I'm not too sure they're so safe, those tiny little trials that aren't doing anything, then we haven't met our societal obligation. Thank you.